For over 70 years, Japan was a global anomaly. A peaceful giant, an economic titan bound by a self-imposed promise to never wage war again. For decades, Article 9 of its constitution was the bedrock of its identity, a solemn vow born from the ashes of World War. But that era is over. Today, Japan is in the middle of its biggest military expansion since World War II, a direct response to new and rising threats right on its doorstep. This isn't just about new ships or bigger budgets. This is the story of how a nation defined by pacifism is being forced to rearm, and what that means for the fragile balance of power in Asia. It's a story of a nation entering what its own leaders call a new era of crisis, and preparing for a future where peace is no longer guaranteed. To really get the scale of this change, you have to understand the old normal. After its defeat in World War II, Japan was fundamentally reshaped. Under American guidance, it adopted a new constitution in 1947. At its heart was Article 9, a clause unlike any other in modern history. It flatly stated that the Japanese people forever renounce war, and that land, sea, and air forces will never be maintained. This was way more than just a legal paragraph. It became a national identity. For decades, Japan threw its immense energy into economic reconstruction and tech innovation. It became a global powerhouse, not through military might, but through sheer economic prowess. Of course, with the Cold War raging, absolute pacifism was never really in the cards. The need for basic self-defense led to the creation of the Japan Self-Defense Forces, or JSDF, back in 1954. But they were, by design and by law, a totally different kind of military. Their purpose was strictly defensive. Their equipment was limited in range and hitting power. They were the army that legally couldn't actually fight a war. This whole setup depended on one critical thing: the US-Japan Security Alliance. The United States kept a massive military presence in Japan, acting as a security guarantor, the shield and spear of the alliance. Japan provided the bases and cash, while America promised to defend it from any attack. For more than half a century, this deal held. Japan essentially outsourced a huge chunk of its national security, which let it prosper under the American nuclear umbrella while sticking to its constitutional principles. This unique position, a pacifist constitution paired with a powerful, yet limited self-defense force, made Japan an outlier among major world powers. But the world that created this anomaly has changed. The peace that followed the Cold War is long gone, and a new, much more complicated security nightmare has emerged right on Japan's doorstep. The very foundations of its post-war identity are now being shaken by a storm of threats that can no longer be ignored. Japan's strategic U-turn didn't happen overnight. It's a direct response to what its own government now calls the most severe and complex security environment since the end of World War II. It all comes down to three main pressures creating a perfect storm. First, and biggest of all, is the rise of China. For years, Japan has watched with growing alarm as its massive neighbor builds up its military, quickly and quietly. This isn't some distant threat, it's right there. The dispute over the Senkaku Islands, administered by Japan but claimed by China as the Diaoyu, has become a serious flashpoint. Chinese Coast Guard vessels now keep a near-constant presence in the waters around the islands, frequently sailing into what Japan considers its territory to challenge its control. These aren't just fishing boats. They're often huge, well-armed ships acting as a tool of state power. Beyond the Senkakus, China's aggressive stance toward Taiwan sends shockwaves through Tokyo. Japanese leaders know that a war over Taiwan wouldn't be a faraway problem. It would be an existential crisis for Japan. The second driver is North Korea. The rogue state's relentless push for nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles is a grave and immediate threat. And it's not theoretical. North Korea has repeatedly launched missiles that have flown directly over Japanese territory, triggering emergency alerts and forcing people to take cover. Recent tests have shown off increasingly sophisticated tech, like missiles with weird, unpredictable flight paths designed to dodge defense systems. From Japan's point of view, it lives in the crosshairs of a nuclear-armed, unpredictable neighbor. The third, and perhaps the final wake-up call, was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While far away, the conflict sent a powerful message to Tokyo. In the 21st century, a big country could still just decide to invade a smaller neighbor, tearing up all the international rules. The fear is that what happened in Europe could happen in Asia. On top of that, Russia has been beefing up its own military activity in the region, often teaming up with China. Joint Russian-Chinese bomber flights and naval drills near Japan have become more common, a clear show of force. This convergence of threats from China, North Korea, and Russia has created an inescapable reality for Japan. The world is no longer stable or predictable. The old model of just playing defense and relying on America was suddenly looking dangerously naive. The storm had gathered, and Japan decided it had no choice but to build a stronger shield and, for the first time, forge its own sword. Faced with this threat, Japan has started a historic and fundamental overhaul of its defense policy. This transformation is built on three pillars: a whole lot more money, powerful new military gear, and a total shakeup of its command structure. The first pillar is cash. In late 2022, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's government released a new national security strategy that shattered decades of tradition. It laid out a plan to double defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027, hitting the same target NATO members aim for. This demolishes the unofficial 1% cap that had defined Japanese defense policy for almost 50 years. The result is a series of record-breaking budgets. For fiscal year 2025, the core defense budget hit Y8.7 trillion, or about $55.1 billion, but when you add related items like the Coast Guard budget, total defense-related spending is closer to Y9.9 trillion, or about $70 billion, already hitting around 1.8% of GDP. All that money is fueling the second pillar, a radical modernization of the Japan self-defense forces. The single biggest change is the decision to acquire counter-strike capabilities. For the first time, Japan is arming itself with long-range missiles that can hit targets deep inside an enemy's territory. This is a monumental shift. A key part of this is the purchase of up to 400 American-made Tomahawk cruise missiles. With a range of over 600 kilometers, these weapons will give Japan the ability to take out enemy bases from a safe distance, with the first missiles scheduled for delivery between 2025 and 2027. Japan is also pouring money into its own homemade long-range missiles, and even developing hypersonic weapons. This modernization touches every branch of the military. The Air Force is set to become one of the biggest operators of the F-35 stealth fighter outside the U.S. The first F-35B variants, the kind that can take off from shorter runways and land vertically, are scheduled to arrive in 2025. They'll operate from Japan's converted Izumo-class carriers, effectively giving Japan its first aircraft carriers since World War II. Japan is also teaming up with the UK and Italy to build a next-generation fighter jet under the Global Combat Air Program, aiming to field one of the world's most advanced aircraft by 2035. The Navy is expanding too, with new advanced destroyers and frigates that will be armed with Tomahawks. The third pillar is reforming how this new military will actually be commanded. In early 2025, Japan launched the Joint Operations Command, a permanent headquarters to control all branches of the JSDF. This is a critical reform designed to streamline decision-making and allow for seamless integration with U.S. forces. The alliance with the U.S. is still the cornerstone of Japan's security, but the relationship is changing from one of dependence to a more equal partnership. Japan is also building stronger security ties with other nations like Australia, the UK, and India, creating a network of alliances to bolster stability. Put it all together, and what you're seeing is nothing less than the rebirth of Japan as a major military power. The sword has been unsheathed, not for conquest, but for what Japan sees as its own survival in a world that is no longer peaceful. Japan's military comeback is a huge deal, and it's sending ripples across the Indo-Pacific and the world. The rearming of the world's fourth-largest economy is completely changing the strategic math in an already tense region. So the big question is, will a stronger Japan make Asia more stable? Or will it just kick off a dangerous new arms race? For the United States and its allies, Japan's transformation is a welcome and necessary move. A more capable Japan strengthens the network of alliances designed to deter potential enemies. For Washington, a Japan that can pull more of its own weight is a much better partner in keeping the peace. Instead of just being a home for American bases, Japan is becoming a proactive security provider. But the view from other capitals is, let's say, a lot more complicated. China and North Korea, the very countries that sparked this change, are predictably hostile. They paint it as a return to Japanese militarism, using it to justify their own military buildups. Beijing accuses Tokyo of threatening regional stability, conveniently ignoring the fact that its own actions are what forced Japan's hand in the first place. This creates the risk of a vicious cycle, a classic security dilemma where one country's defense looks like another country's offense, sparking an arms race that makes everyone less safe. Even across the wider Asian region, reactions are mixed. While many Southeast Asian nations, nervous about China's dominance, quietly welcome a stronger Japan as a counterbalance, the historical scars of World War II haven't completely disappeared. For Japan to be accepted as a regional leader, it has to tread carefully, balancing its new military muscle with smart diplomacy. And this new path isn't easy for Japan either. Doubling defense spending is a huge financial lift for a country with an aging population and a sluggish economy. The government will face immense pressure to pay for both guns and butter. And while public opinion has shifted dramatically in favor of a stronger military, a deep-seated pacifism still runs through Japanese society. The biggest consequence of all this is the creation of a new three-way power dynamic in Asia. For decades, the region's power balance was mostly a two-player game between the US and China. Now, a rearmed Japan adds a third powerful player. The future stability of the Indo-Pacific might no longer hinge on just the relationship between Washington and Beijing, but on a complex and much more unpredictable triangle of power. This is one of the most significant geopolitical shifts of our time, and the story is still being written. If you want to keep understanding the changing dynamics of global power, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives like this one. Japan has crossed its Rubicon. The decision to cast off the shackles of its post-war identity and become a normal military power is a point of no return. Driven by a clear and present danger, the nation is building a military designed for a new era of great power competition. The self-defense forces are being transformed into a truly formidable fighting force, armed with long-range strike capabilities, advanced stealth jets, and a modern command structure built for warfighting alongside its allies. The era of Japan as a peaceful anomaly is over. It is now a nation actively preparing for a conflict it desperately hopes to avoid, believing its newfound strength is the only thing that can prevent one. So what happens next? Nobody knows for sure. Will this move successfully deter aggression and forge a stable new balance of power in Asia? Or will it accelerate a regional arms race, making the flashpoints in the East China Sea and the Taiwan Strait even more dangerous? The world is watching as Japan steps back onto the global stage as a major military power. Not out of ambition, but out of necessity. The future of peace in the 21st century may very well depend on the path it walks from here.